agencies that were related to planning and implementing Ministry of Environment related activities, whereas we are supposed to be fixing climate change. And to do that, of course, you need to have the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Transport, and eventually, most importantly, perhaps, the Ministry of Economic Planning and Finance. So for me, that was really an eye-opener, and I started thinking, how can we be effective in the GEF, but more broadly in the landscape of the sources and providers of climate finance, if we don't support and encourage and foster national communication, national engagement of all of the different policymakers that eventually will have a say on defining a long-term new growth story to meet the climate nature objectives by 2030, but more broadly the SDG goals. So I think that's when we started thinking, and I personally started thinking of the need of integrating, at least as far as the GEF is concerned, nature and climate more effectively. And then this agenda grew steadily. We've seen a number of reports from both IPBES, which is the biodiversity award equivalent of the IPCC, and the IPCC itself, talking about how crucial is to make sure that climate and nature action are talked to at the same table, with the actors sitting in the same room, and potentially with amounts of funding available at the same time to plan coherently for climate and nature. So I think what we need to recognize is, in most countries where we operate, there is an institutional failure. As much as we talk about market failure most commonly, we recognize that the institutional setup that we see in most countries to receive, channel, deploy, monitor climate finance is not really fit for purpose in most countries. And so we are looking at some countries where this is being done and try to use that as examples to replicate in other national circumstances. But essentially, we have this problem of needing to break institutional silos. That as much as it relates to the country ability to receive funding. But I think when we talk about coherence, there is also need to foster coherence from the supplier side. So recently, the GEF has been spearheading and engaged in pushing the agenda about complementarity and coherence with the other climate funds. This is something that is very dear to my mission, to make sure that we collectively with the other climate funds provide a suite of solutions to countries that, again, are fit for purpose, that are simplified enough to ensure scale and access and effectiveness of deployment of climate action. And more broadly, on top of the efforts that the climate funds are doing to simplify the landscape, something else is emerging, and I think I see a lot more of here at COP over the last few months, and it's the concept of empowering countries for country-led investment planning. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything new when I mention the term that probably you've heard of country platforms. This is something, again, we're seeing a lot of. The GEF is involved and pushing for this type of work in a number of countries beyond those included in a net zero nature positive accelerator. We are launching with IMF and World Bank country platforms in Madagascar, Benin and Cote d'Ivoire here at COP. And the idea again is empowering the country to have visibility on the type and scale of financial resources they will have available within a certain time frame for them to plan the financing of action. And I think the Net Zero Nature Positive Accelerator couldn't come at a better time to feed into the discourse and the narrative and the efforts that are being put on the table and tested and piloted about country platforms. So I think we have a real opportunity, Asher, here to show workable ways to address the institutional failure and to sort of promote a institutional setup that ensure for nature positive and climate neutral governance going ahead. So with this, I won't take any more time. I'm very interested to see what speakers will have to say. Good luck with the event, and look forward to more results about the implementation of this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Filippo. And I have to say that from UNEP as a GEF agency, when we first looked at the programming directions and saw this on net zero nature positive, it took us a lot of time to think, what does nature positive mean when we're thinking about climate action? And it's something that we had to work through. I think we're still trying to understand it, but we started to understand it in the context of concrete projects. And I think we're going to hear about that now. So with no further ado, I'll invite the panelists up onto the stage. Let me start with Ms. Atika Ben Maid, the Deputy Head of the Climate and Nature Division at AFD and co-chair of the International Development Finance Corporation Climate Working Group. Thank you, Atika, for joining us today. Ms. Stefania Ardila from the NDC Partnerships, please welcome on stage. Mr. Eric Asher, the head of the UNEP Finance Initiative. And do we have Dr. Moses Ama here from Director of Forestry? Thank you, Dr. Ama, from the Federal Ministry of Environment of Nigeria. And do we have the microphone? We've got a microphone right there, thank you. Yep, thanks, Eric. Okay, so we've got some guiding questions today. We don't have any presentations, this is discussion. Colleagues who are out there as well who are listening, feel free to think about your questions you're going to have. But to kick us off today, I'm going to go through. I think I'd like to start with Ms. Antika, if that's okay. We'll start from that side. And we were talking about financing for NDCs, financing for long-term strategies, financing for nature. What are you hearing from your members? How are you seeing this from the IDFC side in terms of financing these twin objectives together and the challenges that we face within? So,
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll start by describing quickly what IDFC is. IDFC is a group of 27 public development banks from the north, from the south, regional or national development banks. And we have been working together to try to share practices, to have also common standards and common ambition. We are releasing every year green finance mapping, and for 2023, the total climate finance is actually 200 billion US dollar of climate finance, making IDFC the biggest provider of public climate finance, even bigger than the NDBs, and I wanted to mention that. As part of the green finance mapping, we also account for our financing in biodiversity. 2023 for all the member was a decrease from the previous year, but it's also related to macroeconomic circumstances, especially in Asia. And the total number was 8 billion US dollar. Saying that it's not only about tracking what we are doing, it's trying to do more and better. That's why we are having working groups, one on climate, to which I'm the co-chair, and one on biodiversity. And AFD is also the co-chair of this group. Because in our institution, climate and nature is actually considered together. So just to make a parenthesis on that, at AFD we have decided a few years ago that we are going to tackle climate and nature at the same time, making the team in the same department so that there are more exchanges. We were one of the first DFI to commit to have its activities 100% aligned with Paris Agreement. And now we have committed to have 100% of our activities aligned with Coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And we are trying also to support our colleagues, members of IDFC in that path, because we believe that PDBs have a central role to play in both challenges, climate and nature challenges, and that both challenges are interrelated. But to go back to IDFC, we also participate to groups with MDBs notably to have common principles in terms of tracking climate change. And in the biodiversity framework, we are elaborating also a tracking methodology. And by elaborating the tracking methodology, it's not about reporting, it's also about seeing what public development banks, where we can do to do better, to do more, to mobilize more financing in support of national authorities or regional authorities in this regard. And we were present, IDFC was present at the COP16 this year, and they have been launching a work on innovative financial mechanism to tackle both challenges at the same time, because IDFC is a founding member of Finance in Common, so a coalition of 500 public development banks. And in this coalition, we have been creating a lab, a fixed lab, to work on financial innovation. And among this innovation, there are some that are targeting adaptations such as climate resilient debt clauses, but also some that have been targeting nature by working on carbon credits and how to have the highest standards possible on carbon credits, having joint standards in that regard, with a focus for a first phase also on blue carbon, given the fact that oceans will be, well, it's important for both climate and nature, and I think we would all agree on that. But it's next year is going to be a big year with the organization of Ocean Summit in France in June. The other tools that we have been working on too is debt swap for nature, and that could also being for projects that have co-benefits in both climate and nature. If the lab is working on that, is also to influence and to incentivize the members to cover these topics. Because we have seen, as at least at IDFC level, a strong interest after looking at climate. I think we have reached now a really good level in that regard within IDFC. So now we are looking at higher quality climate finance, and we launched a paper about that yesterday, looking at systemic impacts together with UNEP FI, looking at systemic impact of climate finance. And when we are talking about that, it's meaning that we are looking for transformation of economies, having public development banks in the middle of the economies as they are the specialists and the experts in that regard. But transformational finance, yesterday we talked about climate because we are in a COP, but it should be seen also for all SDGs, including biodiversity. In a second step, we have to go like phases by phases. And after looking at climate, I think the next frontier or border for all our members is actually to integrate more and more biodiversity, and not only in terms of tackling the impacts that is already done. We already have standards in that regard. It's more about looking at what we're quoting nature positive, looking at how to have positive benefits from our activities. We try to promote internally nature-based solution for adaptation, for instance, this kind of project and investment, and sharing practices among members. Sorry if I was long.
No, thank you so much, Atika. And we've just heard from the public finance side. I want to stay on the finance side, if I may, and come to the private side, finance side in that case. So we hear about the importance of public development banks, multilateral development banks, starting to see, they've been working for some years on climate taxonomies and starting to bring nature into that. Eric, how do we see it with the private sector in that sense, bringing nature and climate together? It's still quite new, we know, so how do we see that moving forward? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Asher. And also Atika for the framing. Let me go back to first principles a little bit about how the private sector operates. And with regard to both climate and nature action, there are two steps. Hello, does that work? Okay. There are two steps. One is for the functioning of the financial markets, particularly for companies that are listed on stock exchanges and anybody can buy their shares. Company management has a legal requirement to be transparent about any risks that are financially material to the business. And so the first step in terms of engaging relating to these issues is disclosure. And since the Paris Agreement was signed, there has been significant progress. So with regard to the financial sector, probably the most important development is today most companies, particularly public, but not only publicly listed, are required to disclose material financial risks with regard to climate. It started voluntarily, and then now progressively it's been written into legislation. Hold it here. Does that help? Okay. Excuse me. Now, once companies, including financial institutions, are being transparent about the risks from a changing climate, both physical climate change and transition risks, so policy change, technological change, consumer change, they are more likely to be able to make use of that information. And so the second step is how do you manage based on the information that you have. And this is where we start to talk about aligning with objectives like net zero. And since 2019, we've started to see progress there, where first voluntarily investors, banks and others, and some corporates are saying, we see that it's in our commercial interest to actually align, so financing in the transition to net zero. We believe we need to have a transition plan of how we're going to do that, and we're going to start asking the companies we finance that they have a plan, because that will tell them whether a company, A, is a better position than a company B to navigate a pathway transition of a sector in a specific country. And we have seen a lot of progress there, and that also is starting to be put into legislation and moving at different speeds. But for that second requirement, in terms of how you align, this is where taxonomies become so important. Because to basically say we're going to finance the right stuff to allow a transition, someone has to define what is the right stuff. And so the development of taxonomies, today we have over 50 countries who have in place or in development taxonomies, mostly climate focused, on what are sustainable economic activities, and it allows investors and banks and others to start to disclose, to say how much of our, in corporates, how much of our business activity or financial activity is taxonomy aligned. Now, as we move into the nature space, there's a question of, are we ready for companies to disclose, and are they ready to then act based on that information? At the big picture, the macro picture, we get numbers out there to actually say that negative impact on nature, in many ways it's similar in terms of scale of numbers as climate. We see about $7 trillion of negative nature impact annually on the global system. 5 trillion of that is from private sector activities, 2 from public sector. A lot of the public sector is through the form of subsidies to inefficient activities that do harm to nature. The challenge on the disclosure side is macro numbers don't help a specific company understand what their specific contribution is to that challenge and what they need to do about it. But with at the time of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, the GBF launched 2 years ago, there was the establishment of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which creates the framework for how companies, including financial institutions, can start to disclose on nature-relevant risks. Today, we have over 500 large companies globally who are committed to start disclosing that information. So we start to get the data that's needed, at least to understand how much negative impact companies are having today, which starts to allow decisions to take. But then if we go the next step is to say, how do you really manage? You then need to have taxonomies who can then denote what does it mean to finance essentially net zero, nature positive trajectories of within a certain sector or within a certain company and then within a certain economy. These are the steps that are happening. We're seeing certainly progress, but I think this program now is very, very important because, as Filippo said at the beginning, we need, on the government side, multiple ministries who are working together at the planning scale, including finance and economy, but also environment and others, agriculture, etc. And we need the private sector and public finance providers to be speaking the same language. What does it mean to be net zero, nature positive? Both in terms of disclosure and being transparent to stakeholders, which can be shareholders, can be clients, can be to governments. And then what does it mean to actually have investment strategies that align with these transitions that are required? For net zero, we understand it more clearly. What does it mean to decarbonize steel, cement, agriculture, energy, buildings? So it's clearer there. But when we get into nature, as Asher, you raised, the concept of nature positive, which is kind of the parallel to net zero, is more complicated. And so once again, this is why it's very important to work together, to be communicating on what are the common methodologies, the protocols, the languages that we can use. It's not to say that everything has to be perfect to start acting, but as we start to act, we need to learn, communicate, and improve over time. And I think this type of program offering will be very important for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So we've heard about public finance perspective and also a private finance perspective. But why is the public and private finance moving in this direction? And in general, it's moving for two reasons. One is that we have global agreements that send signals to these actors that they have to start moving in a certain direction. But the real pull is coming from national plans, national policies. And with that, I'd like to pass over to a colleague, Stefania Ardila from the NDC Partnership, to talk a bit more about the development of NDCs, perhaps long-term strategies as well, how they can incorporate both climate but also nature, bring this nature positive aspect in, and in that sense start to give signals and a bit more coherence and a bit more understanding to the private and public finance about how they can join in and come together. Over to you, Stefania.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity for participating in this brilliant discussion. So let me perhaps take a step back and explain a little bit what the NDC partnership is, what we do, and how we're supporting countries with their NDC development process, and also more recently with LT-led development processes. So back in 2022, the origin of the NDC partnership was shortly after the Paris Agreement came in place. So countries, institutions got together and said, okay, we need a mechanism to help mobilize support and above all to make it more efficient, avoiding duplication, enhancing coordination across the board, and reducing also the transaction costs that are implicit in agreeing between the recipients and the providers of the support what's going to be done by when and so on. So this is the essence of the partnership, a coalition of over 100 member countries and more than 100 institutions that work together under the common denominator of making NDCs actionable, implementable. So we've been doing this for a while now, almost or a little over 6 years, almost 7 years of existence in matchmaking the needs and the requests for support from the countries with the resources and the expertise that the member institutions and the funders or the donors have to offer in response to that agenda. This is very much at the essence of what we do, and in particular, we successfully supported the, let's say, last round of NDCs. 67 countries came forward, said we need to have more ambition in our NDCs. How can we do that? So we mobilized resources and our membership to deliver that support, and it was a successful experience in which virtually every country that came to the partnership walked out with an NDC that's much more robust than the initial proposals and targets that were presented in the first round. So now the bar is way higher. I think everybody here knows what's at stake with NDC 3.0, called the last window for really keeping to the goals, ultimate goals of the convention and the Paris Agreement. And again, we have an offering in place since 2022 for countries to come to us, request support at any point in time in develop more ambitious and implementable NDC 3.0 in conjunction with long-term low emissions development strategies. Right now we have 67 countries that are working on NDCs and LTLETs, 60 of them only focusing on NDCs. Over 30 countries of that group are working on LTLETs, so there is a little bit of a significant group of countries that are simultaneously looking at their longer-term ambition via long-term low emissions development strategies and considering what from that needs to be done and actioned now to get to that point by mid-century of really achieving net zero emissions. Very, very happily, the bulk of those countries are in Africa, so countries that had really not moved forward with the process of long-term low emissions development strategies, came to us and said, okay, we want to start working on this. So what we can say of what are the results for now is very little because this work is ongoing at the moment. What we can say and the things that really connect this with nature is, for instance, we've seen that quite a good number of the requests for support are actually focused on enhancing the data that's used to represent the sectors where the nature positive solutions or the nature-based solutions are in place. No, so we're talking about land use change, and forestry. There's a bunch of countries that have come to us with specific requests for zooming into what can be done and how ambition can be raised from oceans, for example. What can be done in terms of forests, reducing deforestation, reducing forest degradation. So we've been supporting through our members that kind of work. So one example that I have here top of mind is Jamaica. They said, okay, we have the need to really go to the next step in enhancing our data and having a time series of how the land sector has evolved over time. We need access to satellite imagery to be able to do that, and this is the kind of things that very specifically are being provided by our partners so they can actually have a better, more accurate understanding of how the sector has evolved and what can happen in the future. And this is really at the essence of raising ambition. If countries are not able to answer those questions, then there is no credibility to the NDCs, there is really no credibility to the LTLETs, and therefore these impacts, cascading into markets won't be possible if that information is not there. So it really comes down to what countries are interested in and that specificity of granularity of information. Do we have it? So this is just one example. And we are facilitating the technical assistance so countries can do that. My last point is the guidance. NDC Partnership Support Unit doesn't really provide, we don't have the muscle to develop specific guidance on nature, for instance, and how to reflect it in LTLETs, but we have 100 institutions that know, many of them are experts on that topic. What we've done is we put together and launched back in June a live public tool, which is called the NDC 2.0 Navigator, that collects live as much guidance as possible from all these institutions and puts it to the service of countries when navigating the question of how do I go about having an NDC that's much more ambitious. And it does have specific guidance on sectors and the opportunities that are implicit in each of the different sectors of the IPCC to enhance ambition. So it's an open invitation for countries to go visit it and also for institutions to go and browse the tool and really see where you can contribute. We receive contributions and guidance from partners all the time, and we put them in the navigator, and we also provide training to countries on how to use the tool. So this is, in a nutshell, what we're doing at the moment. We will be able to speak to results and what happened, I guess, by next COP, we hope. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stefania. So we've heard from public banks, private banks, and we've now heard from the NDC Partnership about planning this transition. Dr. Moses, I'm going to pass to you now, Director of Forestry of Nigeria. What do you make of this net zero nature positive? Does it make sense that when we come down to work by the ministry, do you see that this is a way forward? I've gone a little bit off script of the questions I sent to you previously, but I think I'm sure you'll be able to speak to this. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. One thing that is striking and very exciting is that the nature-based net zero, it's going to help us begin to break the silos, because the only way to make it happen and get result is that it will be collaborative, and every entity within that landscape should be able to work together. So we are quite excited that this is coming as country. Whatever benefits that this comes to present, it will speak to our NDCs, it will speak to the livelihood of forest-dependent communities, it will respond to the policies that government is putting in place. As you are aware, we are not comfortable with that position of our high rate of deforestation. So once we get it right, it means our forest cover, which we have pledged by 2030 to bring it to 20%, that ambition we can fulfill. So for me, we are doing things internally, policies, that we're able to sit these initiatives. As you are aware, we did pledge that our NDCs, 20% will be, the forest cover will be 20% by 2030, but now it's very poor. So we hope that through that, this initiative and collaboration, we should be able to get it right. We also are looking at other very strategic initiatives like the Green Bond. The Green Bond, we were able to put in place the first Green Bond, the second, and we are currently launching the third, looking at about 5 sectors, not just forestry, the transportation, renewable energy, but passing through very taxing, qualifying processes. We do have some challenges when we started, because interministerial issues, what is there for this ministry, what is there for this ministry, but we are navigating it gradually. And as we launch more of the green bonds, we begin to understand our errors and where not to, repeat those things. And thirdly, yes, we have challenges of some capacity issues to be able to, particularly in the forest sector. It's easier with other sectors. The forest sector, which is nature, how do you calculate, how do you do real time for the purpose of saying, as a matter of fact, your afforestation, your restoration is really bringing this to happen. So our hope is that as we begin to engage, and as we have, I just had I talk about opportunities within that platform to take specific responsibilities like carbon data analysis, getting your data quality and all of that. Because every project that we bring under the Green Bond, it must first be in the national budget. And once it's in the national budget, they must assess it to know whether it is truly a green project before it is issued. And all of those processes are what we follow. The current bond is about 50 billion. We are hoping that the process is on, and those sometimes it's oversubscribed because Nigeria is a very huge country. There are opportunities that lies there, and so people, once they are fine, and participants around the landscape see that they want to launch into that opportunity for the green bond. So what I would say is that as country we are very positive and hoping that this initiative will be beneficiary of it, and will be able to, like I say, Nigeria is a very huge country, very complex, and the land use decree gives power to the subnationals. So in crafting our processes, it takes sometimes some rigor that you don't find in other countries, because you need to go down to communities, you need to talk to the state governments, you need to first accept before it is nationally, put in place for it to work. But this is not what we should run away from. That's who we are. So we are taking that and turning it to a positive for us. So for us, this is fine, and we are hoping that as we proceed on this, the clarity of nature positive, as you did say, will become clearer. We were looking at nature for debt swap. We're looking at that, but because it's a landscape that is new, we need to understand it first before we can get in. In New York, we had a side event, and we spoke about it that, yes, it is fine, but what is it? What does it take to do this swap? What are the elements? How do you go around it? So we're still watching. If that happens, it's another thing we'll bring into this plate to work on it. So this is what I have to say for now.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. And so there we've heard from a few different levels and different perspectives around net zero, nature positive development, or planning and acceleration of finance. We've now got 10 minutes. The floor is open, colleagues. For any questions or comments that you'd like to share around net zero, nature positive acceleration. Do we have a microphone? We've got a couple of questions. Do we have a microphone, please? Oh, one moment.
Thank you. I'm Joseph from Uganda. I work with the smallholder banana farmers who have been formed into cooperatives. My question goes to Atika about the finance mapping. I don't know how this works, because these farmers really would like to have support in part of this financial. And then the other question is they need help, support. There is plenty of water, which is normally, looking at the terrain of Uganda, the water is normally in the valleys, but they need solar pumps so that during the dry season, and when I look at Faith in Climate Justice, I just want to know if they would get support to get water pumped up and then be irrigated to their farms within the country. This is the question I thought I would really ask.
Let's take a couple of questions first, Tika, if you don't mind. So we'll pass over to this gentleman.
Great, thanks very much. I'm David Ainsworth. I'm from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and I'm glad we heard mention of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So one of the things I'd like the panelists to speak to is in this talk about this integration of climate and nature finance, what is your engagement with national biodiversity finance plans and national biodiversity strategies and action plans? Because I've heard about NDCs, I've heard about TNFD, but can we look at that other part of the picture as well? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Another question over here, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Thank you. I'm Wani Steven from South Sudan. I just wanted to pause in terms of working within the ecosystem of partnership. We have not seen much in terms of working with the civil society or national organizations that work at the grassroots that have a solutions when it comes to financing climate and nature integration. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So we'll pass over to Atika. Do you mind to start? And then we'll come across to Stephanie, Dr. Moses, and Eric. Thank you.
Sure, definitely. I'll go in the order of the question. So thank you for your question. So first on how the green finance mapping works, and then how to access the funds. The green finance mapping, we have a consultant helping us to gather the information for every single of our 27 members. On climate finance, we follow the common principles that are the same as the one of the MDBs, and we gather the information. For biodiversity, we have developed through our biodiversity working group methodology, but of course we will align as soon as there will be the equivalent of the common principle, hopefully. In terms of local access to funds, that's as part of IDFC and FIX, we are promoting and advocating a lot for cooperation with national development banks, because and that's part of the response, because we believe that there is actually a complementary of activities or comparative advantages between the MDBs that can be big, regional, and that we need them to tackle climate and global challenges, all SDG challenges. But actually, we need also to work with the local network, local financial network. At AFD, for instance, we work in Uganda. We work with UDB. As one example of bank we work with. But also we work directly with the government to promote projects. And that will answer also partly the question from the colleague from South Sudan. It's true that organizations like mine at AFD, we work with civil society. We have support to civil society. We do like a call for projects, and then we work with some organization from all over the world. But when we want to work directly outside of this call for projects, being a financial institution, we have a critical size of the financing we are providing. So what we do usually, and that's something I did when I was based in Egypt, is that we work with a financial intermediary. In Egypt, there was one that was in charge of SMEs, for instance, and then we provide the financing to them. We give them like the framework we want to finance, and then they work with microfinance institutions, with local SMEs, with micro SMEs, and so that's a bit how we work. But there are the two ways. It's either like the call for projects for civil society, and for the rest we go through financial intermediary for size matters and how much we can, how many projects we can manage at the same time. And then the question on the planning. We have, I wanted to mention a project, a facility that we have at AFD called 2050 facility. We have it since 6 years now, so it's quite an old facility to support the elaboration of long-term strategies. And at the moment we are supporting almost 40 countries, either partly or globally. And we also have a research department that is helping in doing macro, financial and fiscal modeling of the impact of climate and nature. And that helps also the partners in the dialogue if they want to see, for instance, for the JETP in South Africa, it helped a lot before even the negotiations to let them know what would be the fiscal consequences of the transition, to help also in the decision making and what would be the best scenario. And I'm mentioning that because we have that in 6 years, but we have that in several phases. And in the last tranche, because we have integrated more biodiversity in our strategic framework, we have been requested. We have considered and to put in the elaboration of long-term strategy biodiversity challenges inside the country. We believe that it should not be only on climate long-term planning. And it resonates with what Dr. Moses said on forest, because that's in a few of our countries, and a few of our countries that are partners. AFOLU is actually the main topic to discuss with them, and it is important for both topic, climate and biodiversity. For national adaptation plans, we have also another facility called adaptation, which is not globally. It's in a few countries, mainly in Africa, where one of the pillar can, if it's the request of the government to use adaptation for national adaptation plans, we support them in this framework. And now we are thinking about doing the same for NBSAP. So we are actually designing a new facility, but it's taking more time only because we don't want to have one facility for plan. Because if we have several plans and there is no coordination and everything is managed in the same department, which is my department, we don't think it's the smartest way. So we try to design it in a way where, even though the request from the government is for an NBSAP, then we tell them, okay, we help you with that, but also we should consider climate inside your NBSAP. So, and see how, depending on what is the majority of the planning or the majority aspects of the planning, which facility we would use. And that's that's how we are considering developing support to NBSAP at the moment.
We'll pass across to other panelists who would like to add. Considering the time, as you make your intervention, also feel free to have any final closing remarks as you come through. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd just like to build on what you said to answer your question. I think, frankly speaking, the divide between the biodiversity negotiations world, community, language, everything, and climate is quite unfortunate, massively unfortunate. But I also think that there is hope in that now there is a formal recognition that the two worlds need to be together, cannot be conceived as something separate. So there was a big step now from the COP28 presidency and the Joint Declaration for People and Nature. The NDC partnership has been a big part of the process, not so much on the political side, but rather on making it operational. So it's not a joint statement that leads to nothing. We're working together very closely with NBSAP Accelerator Partnership. They're like a sister partnership. We help them big time getting set up, creating processes, and we have agreed to collaborate and to have a flow of information between the request for support that they get on their end, what we're getting on our end, how to apply best practices, so those are really comprehensive, reflecting both biodiversity needs, financing needs, and climate needs and their intersection. So this is early days, but I feel optimistic about our effectiveness in really understanding things in a holistic way and not really creating this very artificial separation of policies, but also funding, most importantly. So yeah, that's my quick reflection on this.
Thank you, Stefania. Dr. Moses, any comments from your side? Final comments?
Well, just to say that I heard the NGO said we didn't hear about it. What we do back in country is, I mean, you won't make the desired progress if you do not put the NGOs on the plate for discussions, because they look like they're always there to call you to order. As government, we are very they are inclusive in all our deliberations, because we do not want to start any initiative and get midway and there are comments that begin to put some credibility around the project. So even the bond, our MBSAP development, all of it, we are always having the NGOs there. But I want to say that moving forward, like I got one of the panelists talk about, supporting the MBSAP in the operationalizations and all of that. I do expect that in your interventions, it's good to look at the mapping and look at which is more impactful that you should deploy support to accelerate this desire. So most times support come and they don't really make an impact. They just diffuse after the end of the support. So I want us to begin to map support, impactful support that we can track and say, okay, this has built another pillar for the next progress to sit on. So I desire that as we begin, because as government, yes, we have our internal funding, but we know we are always coming out to say, look, we have a challenge here. We can't do what we want to do if we don't have some hand-holding. And it's that hand-holding that takes us to partners to say, hold our hands so that we can get further. So I want to believe that these opportunities will be there when we come asking, particularly like we have launched our NB, but to operationalize it, for it to begin to bring the desired impact, we'll be needing to seed support in that area, which I'm sure in the coming weeks or months we should have cause to meet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Eric, from your side, final comments. Thanks.
Coming to the NBSAP, absolutely. In a similar way as the NDCs, private sector, they're looking for governments to set plans, to give an indication of, you know, 4 different industry sectors like agriculture. What is the government plan? Now, the reality is, as we all know, the NDC and the NBSAP are at the very high level. The real, when the tire hits the road, is the policies that are enacted based on these plans. So I'm not sure having NDCs focused on climate and NBSAPs focused on biodiversity is a problem. The question is then, how does it get lodged in policies that absolutely have to bring the two together? And then the responses from the private sector and the public sector is in a consolidated way, so that you have strategies, net zero, nature positive, and this is obviously the big thing we're trying to work together in this program. But having, I think, clarity of objectives within NBSAPs helps, and as you would know well, that we've really seen a major mobilization of the finance industry coming to Cali, and the awareness raising. Interestingly, when we give webinars, our nature webinars from the finance industry gets more participation than our climate webinars often these days, because there's a real desire to understand, to raise awareness. Now, how you act is much harder because you don't have the tools, the methodologies, the clarity from government yet. So we're still at the very early stages, but no, absolutely, they're very, very important. And we look forward to continuing to be working with governments in terms of NBSAP development. Civil society, critically important for us, working with the banking and insurance investment industries. Efforts are being made, and for instance, our framing for banking is the UN Principles of Responsible Banking. It's the first framework in the finance industry that actually within its governments has a civil society advisory body. So essentially, it puts value on the engagement with and the positions, views coming from civil society as banks start to set their wide sector strategies in these spaces. But of course, there's a lot to be done there. And one thing as we come into nature, what we know, nature impacts are much more local and rely on issues like indigenous communities in a way that maybe climate hasn't been so much. So corporate actors, financial actors are realizing that you can't skip over the very important role of understanding local actors, and civil society can be a very good tool to be able to bring those messages to the space where you can make decisions. So absolutely, but we also have to admit there's a lot more work that needs to be done there.
Thank you so much, panelists, and thank you for the audience as well. We're right on 1 o'clock. In closing, to highlight, I think we're all aware that we're facing a triple planetary crisis on climate, nature, and contamination. And it's not that we've got more funds available. In fact, if anything, there's a bit of a crunch on the funds available. So how can we harness the win-wins through interactions that can draw and promote positive actions on more than one area, climate and nature together, and local contaminants? And that's what we're trying to think about here, and that's what we're looking to move forward on through planning and also bringing the finance in as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and afternoon, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. And within 3 minutes, there will be a super interesting session that sort of continue on this conversation. We take it down to the civil society, faith-based local communities. How does that relate to the finance structure? So if you want to stay, you're free. So that's the next topic in